Hello, happy listeners, and welcome back to the Hack Your Life podcast. This week I'll be describing how to hack your attention. Now, this episode will still incorporate lots of research as usual, but for the first time, our topic is going to be intertwined with another: communication. Focusing on communication is essential to understanding the foundations of attention and what cognitive forces are to blame for when you get distracted scrolling on TikTok when you have a paper due. Let's dive in. Now, firstly, I want to set some of the groundwork and explain what attention processing even is. According to Guidetti et al., 2023, our attention isn't entirely controllable, and it's actually shaped by various factors. In this article, researchers used a concept called vigilance decrement to explain how our attention is starting to change at a faster rate than ever before. Vigilance here means sustained attention ability, and decrement means decline. Yikes. Now, an important thing to distinguish here is the difference between vigilance underload and vigilance overload, which are when something requires less attention or more attention. So, our brains are constantly evaluating the stimulus around us and determining how much attention or resources we should allocate to them. All this sounds pretty normal. However, when our brains consistently have vigilance underload, are understimulated, we start to direct attention to irrelevant processes, and task monotony only makes our withdrawal of attention even faster. Our brains are actually being programmed to be lazy, and we're the ones doing it. Guidetti et al. Even points out that there can be processing errors in localized regions of the brain, which can happen when a task requires a lot of sustained attention but doesn't receive it. The point of attention's physical impact on the body is further reinforced by Cox et al. 2000, who explains that sustained attention can even lead to acute hypoglycemic episodes or rapid blood sugar reductions. This research article is pretty dense and does a good job of covering all the psychological and physiological implications, but lacks a little in real-world applications, making it hard to connect with readers. This is why we'll be using this information to guide us through the next few articles. Alright, so now we know what vigilance is, as well as issues with misfires in our brain, but how do we fix that? I'm going to be walking through 3 different ways that we're going to be able to hack our attention, which are communication channels, motivational systems, and mindfulness. First, let's explore how communication alone can impact the way we shape attention allocation, explored by Stevens et al. 2013, who studied the effectiveness of different channels during an emergency. In a random sample survey sent to 15% of university members after a 2010 campus shooting, they asked participants to report which channels they received an urgent message on and their perceived level of urgency. Even though the majority of participants were very familiar with email, Facebook, and texts, they found the most impactful channel was face-to-face. Not only was it found that face-to-face channels were easier to get people's attention and communicate urgency, but they found that this was because participants had become desensitized to communication online. Because of this, the same level of urgency of face-to-face was reached online only when participants received the same message in more than 3 different ways. Some possible limitations with this study is that the participants could have hindsight bias since they were still recently affected by a tragedy on campus at the time of the study. So this potentially could yield different results with non-emergency situations. However, synchronous channels have much less room for misinterpretations, so even with this extreme example, we can see how you can hack your attention if you focus on in-person communication. Similarly, motivational systems were found to have a great impact on what can attract and sustain our attention in communication. In Shu and Woods 2019, researchers explored why people continue to multitask despite knowing its harmful effects on performance. This study asked 71 adolescents ages 11 to 17 to report a few times a day over the span of 2 weeks if their current activity was media-related or non-media-related. The participants also reported any positive or negative emotions to the main task that they were working on. Their results showed that the more tasks someone was working on, the less attention each task got. which was an expected result since attention is a limited resource. Unexpectedly, though, was that the longer the duration of the task, the more positive the evaluations decreased, which decreased motivation to complete the task at all. So when we multitask, not only do we perform worse than we expected to, especially with media-related tasks, but it also actively prevents us from finishing the task we started with. It looks like the days of doing calculus with The Office in the background are numbered. So clearly these results show how gratification is what drives our motivation. So when a task is more appetitive, which means enjoyable and alluring, it is much stronger of a prediction of our attention allocation. Some limitations in this study is that it completely depends on adolescents' ability to self-report, which could go pretty wrong considering they were only asked a few questions. To try to minimize this though, Shu and Woods worked to train all the participants on multitasking before beginning the study. However, I believe that making the emotions more detailed and task-specific effects like math versus crocheting would make their research even stronger. Nonetheless, Shu and Wood's study is one of few and shows us how we can hack our attention by slowing down and focusing on one task at a time. Lastly, we'll conclude with mindfulness's impact on cognitive control with a research article from Simpson et al. 2020. Now, the goal of this article was to research the significance of mindfulness-based cognitive training, or MBTC for short. Through analyzing 17 articles from 2000 to 2020, there were significant findings on how mindfulness can help improve sustained attention, decision-making, memory, and overall cognitive function. This all sounds super beneficial, but what even is mindfulness-based cognitive training? According to Schimmelpfennig 2024, MBTC can include anything from stretching to yoga to meditated breathing techniques, which can be effective because mindfulness helps you observe and identify feelings, while cognitive therapy teaches you to interrupt automatic thought processes. Now, some possible issues with this article is that they didn't do any research themselves, but rather analyzed other research which could have led to some outdated results. Additionally, Simpson et al. Started with 82 initial articles, but ended up only analyzing 17, giving them a fairly small sample size to draw conclusions from. However, their findings were still very significant and can be further supported by psychologist Dr. Daniel Siegel. In his book Mindsight, 2010, Siegel explains further how a specific kind of mindfulness can help improve neural plasticity and help to reprogram those harmful automatic processes. He explains Mindsight as a kind of focused attention that allows us to see the internal workings of our own minds, which enables us to get ourselves off the autopilot of ingrained behaviors and habitual responses. This idea of directing our thoughts, feelings, and actions rather than being driven by them helps to cover what is lacking in Simpson et al. Studies about mindfulness and attention. So today we went over about 7 different sources to help shed some light on how attention and communication intertwine to influence some of our everyday habits. During this episode, we have confirmed that attention is not a constant, and it can be changed just as easily as we want it to. We hold the ability to improve our cognitive function and attentional processes by using more synchronous channels of communication, by getting more gratification from tasks, avoiding multitasking, and even by using mindfulness practices. These studies are just a few of many which are so important to discuss, especially in a time when people feel stuck, overwhelmed, and helpless. Always keep in mind that it's possible to change those perceptions, feelings, and our responses, especially when it comes to our attention. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Hack Your Life podcast on attention and communication. I hope you enjoyed this one just as much as I did. For more insights on these topics, I encourage you to explore these studies yourself, and I'll reference them below in the description. Stay engaged, stay curious, stay hacking your life, and I'll see you next week with an exciting new episode.